Kant on Treating People as Ends in Themselves by Honora O'Neill. Recall that Kant thinks that there is only one supreme principle of morality. Previously, we studied the categorical imperative of universal law and how to use it. That is not quite the end of the story on Kant's moral theory. In fact, Kant thinks that the one supreme principle of morality takes a few different forms. The first form, or categorical imperative number 1, was the universal law principle from our last lecture. The third form, or categorical imperative number 3, is the formula of the kingdom of ends. It is notoriously obscure, and so we will not be covering it. The second form, categorical imperative number 2, is the formula of the end in itself. This will be the content for this lecture. Here's the formula of the end in itself. Act in such a way that you always treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never simply as a means, but always the same time as an end. So when we look at the ACE maxims that reflect our actions, we need to be sure that they are consistent with categorical imperative number 2. To use someone as a mere means is to involve them in a scheme of action to which they could not in principle consent. Sometimes we cannot avoid treating people as means in a morally unobjectionable way. For instance, when you go to the bank and you ask the bank teller for a withdrawal, you're using the bank teller as a means to your money. But what's morally wrong is to treat others as if they are merely or only a means to whatever it is you want. One popular example of using persons merely as a means is the false promise case. Imagine that a borrower promises to repay your money, but that in fact he has no such intention. If the promise is accepted, then the person to whom it was given must be ignorant of what the promisor's intention or maxim really is. Successful false promising depends on deceiving the person to whom the promise is made about what one's real maxim is. And since the person who is deceived doesn't know that real maxim, he or she can't in principle consent to it. In cases of deception and coercion of this kind, one person uses another merely as a means of obtaining money or some other thing they value. To treat someone as an end in him or herself requires in the first place that one not use him or her as a mere means, but beyond that, one may also seek to foster others' plans and maxims by sharing some of their ends. By this, O'Neill means that categorical imperative number 2 both requires that we not adopt some maxims, like the false promising, and it further requires that we do sometimes adopt others' maxims as our own, out of respect and appreciation for the fact that those persons have intrinsic value just as much as we ourselves do. The primary way of sharing others' ends is through acts of beneficence, like helping and being generous. For example, take charity work. Not only do volunteers refrain from exploiting the homeless, they also offer food, shelter, counseling, and other things to reaffirm the intrinsic value of all humans. That's an example of volunteers sharing the homeless people's ends. Kantian ethics is somewhat limited because it can only apply to intentional activities, which are done in accordance with maxims. However, Kantian ethics has a real advantage over utilitarianism, its polar opposite. It is conceivable that a society of Kantians would end up with less happiness or with fewer persons alive than would some societies of complying utilitarians. On the other hand, nobody will have been made an instrument of others' survival or happiness, as they were in the forced organ donation cases required by utilitarianism, for instance.